is going on, Governors? Chisgule here, and today we are going to update our epic tier list. That's right, we've got every single epic ranked against all the different types of things you might use those commanders for in Rise of Kingdoms. We're going to rank them so you know which commanders to use where. If you like Rise of Kingdoms videos where we rank the commanders, you should like and subscribe because we've done that many times in the past and will many times in the future. And we are a sponsored creator with Rise of Kingdoms. My friends, reviewing commanders is one of my favorite activities, and there is a lot to talk about when we evaluate commanders for the tier list. We look across the following categories. First, city defense. Then barbarians and forts, open field combat, rallying cities, attacking objectives, and then defending objectives. Now, when we rank commanders, we use the following scale. S is the savage tier, or super awesome if you prefer. There's only one S plus per category, and we use that plus or minus to show whether or not a commander is slightly better or slightly worse. Now, we've created this scale to ladder in directly to our legendary tier list. It's the same scale. So an A there is like an A here. An S there is like an S here, but there's no S's in this list because none of the commanders at the epic tier are quite that good, but there are a bunch of A's floating around. A stands for absolutely use this commander for this activity. B is better than most. C is could be better, use a different commander. And D is don't use this commander for this activity. F is freaking don't use this commander for this activity. Use them for other stuff instead. So as I mentioned, this scale ladders directly into the legendary tier list scale. It's the same scale. So, you know, an A minus there, I'm saying is equal to an A minus here. Okay, so they're equal. You can compare apples to apples. So let's get right into it. We're going to go through each of the categories. Then we're going to give you an overall set of ratings for how we think the different commanders sort of rank up and ladder against each other. And then we'll offer some closing thoughts and some guidance around where we think you should be investing. So let's start first and foremost with city defense. Now, epic commanders are actually remarkably good in the category of city defense. The first commander at the very top of this list, all the way up at A+, which is a very high rating, and we actually have elevated this rating recently, is Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is offering AoE damage, which, by the way, if you hit an army that's not even in combat against your city, it will inflict deaths on those armies. Hugely powerful, generates a ton of rage. People like to swarm things, or it's hard to see when the rally hits, and sometimes they're nearby. Sun Tzu is a solid A+, and I feel pretty amazing about them for that rating. If you're not using a legendary commander, Sun Tzu should be on your wall. Now, since we last did this tier list, we actually elevated Kusunoki in our evaluation of this commander. That is because Kusunoki's the first skill is quite remarkable. It, at first blush, seems fine. You do some AoE damage, which is very relevant, as I was just describing, for defending a city, because again, you hit those armies that are standing nearby, they're going to have deaths inflicted on them, even if they're not actually hitting your city. The thing that tips this skill over, though, is that it clears all negative effects. Removes all negative effects and control effects from Kusunoki's troops. This is a big deal. We seem to be in a meta very heavily focused on debuffs. Ethelfled offers debuffs. Alexander the Great offers debuffs. Hannibal Barca is doing debuffs. Heck, Boudica is doing debuffs. Cao Cao is doing debuffs. All these commanders are doing debuffs, and Kusunoki just clears them all. So I actually think, especially if you think your city might get swarmed, Kusunoki on the wall is a super strong choice. Definitely would recommend him for that, and we've elevated him from an A- to an A. Also remaining strong in this category is Pelagius and Ulgi Mundok. we'll offer Herman as a noteworthy mention. We do feel that enough of the stat allocation here is going towards things that we're not all that excited about, specifically this Archer March Speed bonus, that he's good, but he's not quite as good as Olgi Mundok with the anti-swarm technology that is coming in the form of the 4th skill, who is right next to the commander I was just looking at. There it is. When you're attacked, there's a chance that you increase your damage by 100%. Well, the more folks hitting you, the better the odds are that you're going to do that. I actually really like Olgi Mundok for defending your city. And in a similar vein, Pelagius is just a monster. I mean, he generates rage, which is something you really want to be doing. He's got healing, which is a fine choice. There's no march speed here. It's all into stats, which I really think is quite strong. And increasing your watchtower and garrison attack is pretty solid. So overall, epic commanders do very well, at least the garrison commanders, for defending your city. We would recommend them for that activity. The next category we're going to get a look at is Barbarians and Forts, and there's not much to talk about here. This has remained mostly the same since the last time we produced this list. Commanders that are peacekeepers, such as Boudica and Belisarius, and, of course, Lohar, all shine in this category for their damage to barbarians and experience gained skills, as well as, of course, the peacekeeping tree. All very, very strong. We did slightly elevate our estimation of Sun Tzu since he is one of the preferred commanders for walking around the open field to aggro extra barbarians with your action points. The way that works is you spend your action points to hit one barbarian, and if there's another one standing nearby and your AoE, that's area of effect damage, actually hits the extra barbarian, it'll attack you and it costs you no extra action points. He is one of the more popular commanders for that activity, and so we bumped him up to a B+. The next category we're going to get a look at is open field combat. And my friends, the nature of open field combat is in kind of an interesting place right now. People have more marches than ever when you're in an older kingdom, at least. And what we're seeing is that AoE is even more effective than it has ever been. Sun Tzu in an open field brawl is not too far off from being a legendary commander in our estimation. We give him an A-, and we feel really, really good about that. The other commander worth calling out at an A- is Joan of Arc. I've upped my estimation of her in this capacity. I actually think she's quite strong, because this first skill, buffing 30% of stats for each of the different troop types, that's infantry, archers, and cavalry, also granting the additional 50 rage per second for 4 seconds with expertise, is really quite game-changing, and you want somebody to have this commander in the open field. If you're looking at epic commanders, it probably should be you bringing the Joan of Arc. Verification. Drat and double drat. We've also upped our estimate of a couple other commanders for the open field. That includes Kusunoki, because again, we do feel that debuff removal is quite strong. We feel that is quite strong. We've also, and of course also the AoE is more likely to hit a bunch of folks because folks are really clustering. We really like Pelagius as a primary commander in the open field, or as a secondary commander, but the skill and cavalry tree, those are quite good talent trees for the open field. We'd recommend them for that activity, even though they don't have any extra march speed. And lastly, we hugely upped our estimate of Osman in the open field. Now, Osman really requires a rage engine, so you got to pair with a commander like Pelagius or Boudica, or if you're pairing with legendaries, and you certainly could consider this, and should consider this, putting Osman as a secondary to a commander like Khan is actually totally gangbuster. It is a legit, super powerful combination. 10 out of 10 would recommend it. And that is because Osman has extra damage that is dealt every time a skill fires off. That includes the active skill of the primary commander and the active skill of the secondary commander. So that's an extra 800 damage factor every round of skills, which is really quite strong. And with a commander like Khan, those rounds of skills are firing off really, really fast. So we upped our estimation of Osmond for that reason. And also, honestly, the troop capacity is pretty sweet. Let's move on to the next category, which is rallying cities. And my friends, you really should not be rallying cities with epic commanders. Oh my goodness, do not. Just no. Let someone who's got the legendary commanders and the higher technology do the rallying. We did slightly elevate our estimation of Kusunoki in this capacity because rallies frequently do get swarmed. If it was an archer rally, I actually really do think removing the control effects is pretty powerful. We've elevated our estimation of him slightly, but still, you shouldn't be using him for this. Let's go over to the next category, which is rallying objectives. And I'm going to offer the same advice I just gave, which is that shouldn't it be someone with the legendary commanders that's doing this? But maybe you're in the early game, and if you're in the early game and you're looking at epics, we actually have recently elevated Kusunoki, for the reasons we've been describing, up to a B, and also put Ulji Mundok at a B. Now, the reason that I like both Kusunoki and Ulji Mundok is they both have a small amount of anti-swarm technology. With Kusunoki, that's in the first skill, Ulji Mundok, that's in the fourth skill, and the expertise skills both increase the stats of your troops, which we feel is pretty good. No wasted stat allocation here. I'll also call attention to the fact that if you are using Ulji Mundok to rally something, it's going to reduce the defense of the target. So any additional armies that are built in to swarm that target will have extra effectiveness during the defense reduction window. Overall, I guess it's also worth mentioning that if you were to rally an objective, we put Sun Tzu at a B-. That AoE is sweet, the rage generation is sweet, and he only sort of cares about what troop type you're bringing. There's really only one stat here that is relevant for that, and that's the infantry health. We also put Pelagius at a B- because the skills that he's got here, the rage engine, the stats, are all quite strong. Let's move on to the next category, which is defending objectives, and here things get kind of interesting. We have hugely elevated our estimation of Sun Tzu for defending objectives. The latest that I've heard from my contacts at Lilith is that garrison skills and talents do apply in flags, forts, holy sites, and passes, which means you're getting a solid 7% damage reduction from the garrison skill on Sun Tzu. That is very powerful. We've elevated Sun Tzu to an A+. This commander is a slam dunk must invest for every free-to-play player. This commander is stupendous. We've also highly elevated our estimation of Kusunoki, who we previously had at a C+, perhaps a B-, now elevated to a B+, due to the anti-swarm technology and the area of effect damage. Again, if you stand near one of these objectives, just like if you're defending your city, when you do that AoE, even if they aren't attacking you, if you hit the army, then you will inflict deaths upon them, and that is really quite powerful. One other commander that we had underrated, but you still really shouldn't be using for defending objectives is Herman. And that is because the third skill on Herman, which increases your attack, will now also apply for defending the objective, which is pretty strong. It's pretty strong. It's reasonable. It's fine. We still think he's just a C+, and it's a commander you really should not be using. A commander you would consider using would be Ulji Mundok, again for the anti-swarm technology stats, and also inflicting a defense reduction onto a target that might be swarmed by other people, even if it's a rally, would be very, very powerful in a defense capacity. Also, we really like Pelagius's rage generation, healing, and stats. We gave them a B- as well. So, my friends, if we now go to the overall ratings, it should be no surprise that at the very top of this list, and by the way, we've had them organized in the order we would rank them this entire time, at the top of this list is Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is truly an exceptional epic commander, and honestly, is approaching legendary status in terms of their effectiveness. Invest in this commander. You can do so with confidence and you will get value. We now have Kusunoki as the follow-up to Sun Tzu at a B. The anti-swarm technology and debuff removal is powerful, and we possibly underestimated this commander, especially if you can navigate a situation where you can fight from relative safety and aren't too worried about getting caught in the open field without march speed. They're also really good for defending your city. You should pair if you're using two epics. Sun Tzu and Kusunoki seems reasonable to me. I would recommend them. The next two, in no particular order, are Pelagius and Uljimundak. Pelagius is an exceptional open field commander that you can use to defend your city, that you can use to potentially rally or defend an objective. I like Pelagius all around. I still use him as one of my cavalry leaders, which is saying something, right? That is saying something. When I'm using primary commanders and I don't care too much about the march speed, I would use Genghis Khan as a primary. I would use Minamoto as a primary. And then, what other cavalry commanders do I have that I'm using as a primary? Well, if I'm bringing 3 marches, it's going to be Pelagius. So I'm pretty happy with him as a primary commander and would recommend him in that capacity. Similarly, I think Uljimundak is really quite strong. If you prefer infantry over other unit types, you can definitely use him to defend your city and feel pretty gosh darn good about it. I also think that he's decent in the open field, has some potential for rallying and defending objectives, but for the most part, he's sort of a tanky, debuffing commander, and I feel pretty good about him, but not stupendous. I personally have invested the least in him of literally every epic commander I've got, which tells you I'm not really using him as a primary. If I had more infantry marches, I would certainly consider it, though. The following commanders are rated at C+ to C-, and what that really means here is that they have a niche role, and we'll go over what I think those roles are. First up is Baibars, who I think is really quite exceptional as a primary commander for the open field, largely because of that AoE, and also when they leave combat, they get a little bit of healing and a little bit of march speed. In fact, kind of a lot of march speed. I think they're great for open field combat, they're great for a Mighty Governor kill event, and that's what I would stick to using them for. You could also use them in Ark of Osiris for open field combat for all those same reasons, and even as an Ark carrier. The next commander that has a niche role is Joan of Arc. Use her in the open field, buff your allies. You could use her as a primary because the support tree offers a huge amount of rage restoration, which is really quite exceptional. If you were using her in the open field, this sort of a build, and I now have a few more talent points I can even start to place, this sort of a build is the direction you might want to head for maximum open field effectiveness. The next commander we can get a look at is Boudica, and the thing I like about Boudica is that she actually doesn't have a particularly niche role, well, besides killing barbarians, for which she is amazing. You can really pair her with any commander and feel fine. She's just not stupendous, but she is extremely versatile, and for that reason, you can use her just about anywhere. Know, however, that in the open field, because she doesn't really have any tanky mechanisms to protect herself, she will get targeted and probably burned down, but at least she does offer some amount of healing, which would give you some sustain. You could try to hide her behind a more tanky commander like Uljimundak, and that might give you a better shot in the open field. You could also pair her with a commander like Sun Tzu, by the way, and feel really good about the rage generation. That is really quite strong. The next commander we've got to talk about with a niche role is Herman, and you've probably seen my videos where I talk about some of the best epic pairings. I actually think Herman primary with El Cid secondary can be very effective. You get a 3-second silence chain, which is very powerful if you use those commanders in combination. The way that works is that Herman's active skill fires. It initiates a 2-second silence, which starts on the next turn. And then the turn after that, the target is still silenced, but your second commander, El Cid, will fire off his active skill, which then on the third turn, his silence applies. So that's how you get a solid 3-second silence chain with Herman primary. I do like the march speed for the open field. I actually think the damage factor here is pretty reasonable with the expertise skill. And the rage restoration on the fourth skill is really pretty strong. Overall, I may be slightly underrating this commander. You should use them. Use them as a part of a silence engine. Use them as a part of a rage engine. And I think that's a pretty good application. Next up is Belisarius, which is a commander that, like, look, they're great for barbarians. They're great in the open field for the Mighty Governor if you're hunting. Lots of different gatherers. I think they're great for those activity. This is a cheaper version of Cao Cao, a much cheaper version of Cao Cao. If you don't have Cao Cao, but you wish you did, and instead you've got epic sculptures to use, Belisarius is your go-to, specifically for that mobility tree. The next commander at the epic tier that we can talk about is Osmond. Put him in a rage engine and you can do a lot of damage. That said, a lot of damage is relative. I feel like the role of a free-to-play player should be more focused on buffing and debuffing than doing big damage, and that is because you probably don't have max technology, which is what you would want to inflict the most damage possible. That said, if you want to do a lot of damage, pair Osmond with a rage engine and you will get that. The next commander that we really haven't talked much about at all during the entirety of this video is Scipio. Scipio is an interesting one. He's super tanky. You can use him in the open field in a combination, perhaps as a secondary to Boudica, to make that army extremely tanky, and I think that's actually a pretty solid choice overall. I would use Scipio as a secondary in a situation where you want to become more tanky and you need more survivability, and there are a lot of open field situations where that would be true. He doesn't have any march speed, but if you pair with, for instance, Pelagius, and that's not a perfect pairing. There's some complexities there that make that a little weird. The reason would be that in these talents, there are skills here that make it so that you buff the damage of the secondary commander. By skills, I mean talents. There are talents here that buff the damage of the secondary commander. And, it's not a perfect match, but it does make you more tanky. And you could go that route. I think that would actually be totally fine. The last commander in here we've really not talked about at all is Lohar. He's a beast for battling barbarians, and use him for that activity, but not anything else. Don't use him for anything else. This brings us to an interesting point of inflection as we evaluate these epic commanders. Where are commanders headed in the future, and will we get more epic commanders? I don't actually have the answer to that question. I think it is highly likely that more epic commanders will come into the game. I definitely think there will be more legendary commanders coming into the game. It is possible that at some point, if I put my tinfoil hat on, that mythic commanders could be a thing, but it's not currently, and I've heard no whisperings of that, no rumor of that. It's just a thing that could be at some point down the road. What we have seen is that historically, when they introduce more epic commanders, what they also do is tie in new civilizations. So it is possible that we could see new epic commanders in the context of being a starting commander for a new civilization, and that seems like something that might at some point happen. I personally feel that the game doesn't particularly need more civilizations right now, although I certainly will take that additional diversity if they're going to offer it to us, but I would probably rather they focus their energy on other things. So my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Which of these epic commanders do you think is the best? Which ones are you investing in? I'd be pretty curious to hear what you think of the evaluation that we put together. There certainly has been some interesting movement elevating Kusunoki and Sun Tzu on this list. And man, if you haven't already invested in Sun Tzu, you really should. I still occasionally find uses for them, and I've got a lot of diversity in commanders available to me, which means you will most certainly find use for them as well. Like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.